Hi, so this is my second video then on substitution. Keeping it nice and straightforward. I've got the same letters I had before, but you'll notice that the expressions that I'm using are a little bit more complicated. And what I really want to go through with you here is some of the misconceptions, particularly in relation to BIDMAS. Okay, so we're going to talk about BIDMAS again pretty much straight away. And if you remember from the last video, I wrote it up and we just talked about the levels, and if you want to go back and have a refresh on that, I recommend you do that first. So the B stands for brackets, I for indices, and that's going to be one of our important ones today, and then D and M for division and multiplication, A and S for addition and subtraction. And it's just remembering that there are 4 levels, okay? So division and multiplication are kind of on a par with each other, and so are addition and subtraction. And if you have that in a calculation, you just do it left to right. So the first one we've got here is 3a squared. Okay, so same as in the previous video, the first thing you must do, write out the expression you've been given, and then underneath it, write out again with the value that you've been given. Okay, so in this case it's 3. Now remember, 3a squared, if there's nothing in between the 3 and the a, then the calculation we're doing is a multiplication. So we write 3 times, now the a is a 5, and we do 5 squared. Now a common mistake that people make here is they'll do 3 times 5, get 15, and then do 15 squared and get 225. That is not correct because of BIDMAS. The I, which is indices, meaning the squared, must happen first. So we must first of all do 5 squared, which is 25, and then we do 3 times 25, giving us 75. You'll notice there's quite a difference depending on what order you do these things in, so we must follow the conventions and we must do the correct order for operations. So next one, similar kind of thing, we've got a squared plus 2c squared. Remember that means 2 times c squared, and we just write out the letters, we replace the letters with numbers. So a is 5, so we're going to write 5 squared plus 2 times, now c is negative 4. Now I'm going to be very specific here, and I'm going to put negative 4 in brackets. Now I wouldn't normally do that if it was not a negative number, because it's not necessary, but here we are saying the negative 4 is squared, not 4 squared, but negative 4 squared. So it's important that that bracket shows that that's what we're doing, because there is a distinct difference. Now the first thing we're going to hit is an I, so we're going to have to do our indices first. So we've got 2 indices here, we've got 5 squared and negative 4 squared. 5 squared is 25, so we can do that, plus 2 times, now negative 4 squared is negative 4 times negative 4, and if you remember, 4 times 4 is 16, but a negative times a negative is a positive, so therefore we get plus 16. Now it's really important here that we remember that that's the case, and actually when you square any number, it's always going to be positive. The only exception to this is 0, because 0 squared is just 0. Every other number is always positive, because you're going to be doing a negative times a negative. Now if you type into your calculator minus 4 squared, your calculator will give you negative 16, and that's because you must have brackets and tell your calculator what you're doing properly, because your calculator will apply BIDMAS and do the 4 squared and then put the negative sign on afterwards. So just try to remember that so that you don't make errors. Okay. Right, so the next step then, following our rules of BIDMAS, our order of operations, well, we've got a plus and a multiply, so we must do the multiplication first. So we get 25 plus 2 times 16, which is 32. And then all we've now got to do, we've got one calculation left, and that is to add those 2 things together. Okay, and we get 57. Okay, so your final answer for that one is 57. Right, moving on to the next one then. Now this time we've got multiplication, we've got powers, but we've also got fraction bar, and if you remember rightly, a fraction bar means divide. So, same step, substitute, replace the letters with the numbers that you've got at the top here. So A is 5, so we have 5 squared. Remember that means times when it's just next to each other, times by -2, divided by C squared, okay? And C is -4, so we've got -4 squared, okay? So then we have to just do our calculation. 5 squared is, I'm running out of room here. Right, remembering, our big maths here, so we must make sure that we do our indices first, okay? So 5 squared is 25 times by our -2, and we've got a power on the bottom as well. -4 squared, remember the same as before, 4 squared minus 4 squared, they're both the same, and that is 16. And now we can actually do our calculation. Multiplication and division, we can do them in either order, but it makes sense to sort out our fraction bar first. 25 times -2 is -50 over 16. Now, if this was a calculator paper, you could get your calculator out and you could just work out what that was. Or what you can do is you can just simplify it. So think to yourself, right, well, what goes into both 50 and 16? Well, they're both even numbers. So if we cancel that, we get 25. And if we cancel that, we get 8. I think it's safe to say that there isn't anything else that goes into both of those. We can just leave our answer as 25 over 8. Or we could say to ourselves, well, how many whole numbers are there? So how many times does 8 go into 25 exactly? And that would be 3 times, because 3 8s are 24. So that's 3, and there'd be 1 left over. So it's 3 1/8, or 3.125 if you want the decimal. So you don't always have to reach for your calculator, you can work it out otherwise. Right, last one, I've put a cubed in there just to make it a bit more interesting. So we have, and again, because it's a negative, I'm going to put the brackets in, -2 cubed, just make sure I've got the right number, minus 2, again that means times, A, which is 5 squared, okay? So, -2 cubed. Now, cubed, we're doing -2 multiplied by -2 multiplied by -2. Okay, so there's a little trick to this. If you're doing more than just 2 numbers multiplied together and you've got many negative signs, count the number of negative signs. In this case we have 3. If there's an even number of them, then they'll cancel out and it'll become positive. If there's an odd number, then there'll be 1 left out and it'll be negative overall. And that happens here. -2 times -2 gives us 4 times by -2, so there's your 1 left over, and so the answer is -8. Okay, so that's -8, take away 2 times 5 squared. Remember, we have to do the indices first, so it's 2 times 25. Okay, so then we have -8, take away 2 times 25, which is 50. And if you think about your number line, you're at -8, take away another 50. Overall, you're going to be at -58. So hopefully that's given you a bit more of an insight into substitution when the expressions are a little bit more complicated.